All right, good news, bad news, right? Good news is we just heard that the United States has purchased enough vaccines across all the developers to vaccinate every American who wants a vaccine by the end of July. It's pretty aggressive if you think about it, because here we are now in the middle of February and going, March, April, July, maybe. But that's the good news. You want the bad news? There's always bad news. The bad news is the number of Americans that want the vaccine are relatively low. People refusing the coronavirus vaccine are in the upwards of 40. Only 49% of U.S. adults are willing to be vaccinated. Walgreens is saying about 60% of nursing home staff have refused to be vaccinated. We saw that in Ohio, right? And those numbers are being mirrored across the country right now. So the idea is, hey, the vaccine is here. Great. Awesome. Roll your sleeve up, get your shot. You're good. But how do you develop herd immunity if so few people are wanting to get the vaccination? Joining me on the show is Paul Seegert. Paul is a managing partner at PCS Advisers, the healthcare advisory. Paul, good morning. How you been?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing good. I thought these numbers would change. Didn't you? That as the vaccine became available and people's arms didn't fall off and they didn't grow an elbow out of their forehead, they went, okay, well, I'm not going to die from this. I got the vaccine. I may have a sore arm or something. It's all good. The word spreads that you're not going to get sick and die because you're the first person in line, and more people jump in. And that's not happening as of yet. Is it still too early, you think, or is there something else going on here?
Well, there's a slow-moving shift, but you're right. It's still a majority of people that say they won't, and a minority of people who say they will get the vaccine as soon as it's available. Yeah. Depending on what you read, it's in the 40s somewhere that say,
right.
Yes, I'll get it as soon as I can. And that leaves a lot of us that are saying we're not going to get it, or we'll wait and see how it works on the other people first,
right.
Basically.
Yeah, I think that's pretty normal, right? I mean, I'm never the first guy in line for a new movie that's going to be awesome, or, hey, the new iPhone comes out. I'm not camping out overnight when you could actually wait in lines to get the new iPhone. I'd rather you get it and realize it's a piece of junk before I drop $800 I don't have on a phone. So that's how I roll, and I think I'm probably like the typical person, right?
Yeah, I think so, too. And I think we've focused a lot. This has become so political, unfortunately, that the messaging has not been great. And that's probably saying it pretty nicely. Mm-hmm. We haven't messaged very well around why were we able to come up with a vaccine so quickly. So I think it's fairly natural that you have people that are hesitant to take it when our prior record was 4 years to turn out a vaccine. We need to educate the population that this has been made very differently. This mRNA technology is new and different, and it's possible to get that kind of vaccine built more quickly.
And there's something to be said about that, too, is our American skepticism. Because we've seen what happens when things get rushed to market. I mean, how many times have we heard stories about the Food and Drug Administration, who is supposed to be the referee in this thing between what we need and the distributors and actually companies who manufacture stuff doing what they're supposed to do, that there is there's a process of trial and clinical trials and the like, that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, the due diligence, right? They're the police. But we've all too often seen in the class field of drugs and pharmaceuticals that a company comes out, they get greenlit, FDA says, yeah, great. And then a year or two later, we're starting to learn that there's some serious health consequences for those people who are using that product. And then the FDA pulls the rug out from under and suspends its distribution. So we've seen that before. Why is this different?
Yeah, unfortunately, you're right. We'll see commercials that encourage people to take a new drug, and then sometimes a couple of years later, you have another commercial from a law firm about a class action suit.
Right. It's like, I don't want to be part of that. I don't need mesothelioma from a vaccine. So
exactly.
If that's okay, so the RNA technology, I've talked about this before, but again, there may be someone who's listening going, I still don't understand why this is different. Explain that if you can.
Well, the Pfizer-BioNTech story is a great one. The couple that started BioNTech, the husband had 10 or 11. He had mapped out 10 or 11 potential vaccines on his computer before they even had a sample of COVID, before they even had a COVID or even had a known case in Germany where they are. So it's an entirely different approach where they are able to build it more quickly because they don't have to go through this old process where they would get virus, deaden virus, grow things in chicken eggs, and so it's quicker to reproduce it. Once you've built it, the manufacturing process can be done more quickly, and it's quicker to get it to market. So it's an entirely different animal. We are seeing that some vaccines that are still in the pipeline are being made in that older style, they'll set records too, but they won't have gotten to market as quickly. We've got
and Paul, this is going
to
this is going to change how vaccines, but also how things like this are produced from this point forward, right?
Yeah, this is revolutionary. Absolutely. Our ability to respond to things like this in the future, I think, will be much better. Mm-hmm. I also think you see a lot of talk about and I think there's been a lot of focus on getting more total vaccine purchased, as if that were the primary problem. And it's really not. That we need to focus more on what we've been talking about this morning, educating people around the safety of this vaccine, because hesitancy for vaccines is normal in America. As you mentioned, we're a skeptical group. It's always been 25-30% of people that are not up for it, around 30%. And we need to educate people on that. Instead, it's pretty easy to get press and attention for buying more vaccine, or you see the governor of New York saying, hey, we're going to go direct. He tried to anyway. He wasn't successful at it. We're going to go direct to Pfizer and get more vaccine, when he's still only has distributed about 60% of what he receives gets distributed or gets in people's arms. And that's pretty true across the board in most states. They haven't had a lack of production or lack of access to the vaccine itself. We've been slower than we'd like at getting in people's arms because of hesitancy and because of just the logistics of such a massive rollout, too.
Yeah, we've never experienced anything like this in our lifetimes as far as getting this vaccine out. One may make a case, say, well, when polio vaccine, I remember being a little kid and getting the sugar cube one. By then it had long been eradicated. But to that point, we have the childhood immunizations. This is now not children. This is adults. And it's a much harder thing to do because, typically your kid lines up in a school gym, gets the shot, gets whatever, and okay, call it a day, or goes to your pediatrician. This is getting grown men and women to do it. That's a lot harder.
I talked to the CEO of a hospital, a client, and he was sharing that the hesitancy was really kind of blew his mind, but it was a very high percentage of the workers in his hospital that were not interested in the vaccine, and they were choosing not to mandate it, even though they can. And that's largely been the position of employers, I think, not to mandate it. But he was quite surprised by that.
Why is that? Why would we see people in healthcare not want to get the vaccine? I get, dumb people like me, but and I'm going to get the vaccine when it's available for my age. But why healthcare workers it's like doctors and nurses not wanting to get something, and they deal with science all the time. Or is it the support staff mainly that may not be as in tune with what's right?
That is interesting to get down into that data. The hesitancy does increase as you go into more rank and file positions. Hesitancy increases. And that kind of makes sense. There's just not as much education, perhaps, around the safety of it and the overall disease itself. And then another thing that CEO mentioned to me, that hospital CEO, is that we're handling this in an unusual way, really, and maybe it's not the most sensible and logical way if we want to get this vaccine out there as quickly as we can. Hospitals are really not the best setting for us to vaccinate America. They've got a lot going on. They're treating all the people that have COVID.
You don't want to go where the sick people are if you're well, right?
Right. So instead, if you look at, I'm getting a COVID test tomorrow, and if you look at what we've done to mobilize the pharmacies around the country to be able to do that. Just with CVS as an example, you've got 4,500 locations or something to get a test. I don't see why it would have to be a whole lot harder to get in that same line and get a vaccine. And that's how we do, when you think about the flu vaccine and how we're able to get so many people vaccinated for the flu each year. We don't use hospitals for the most part to do that.
Well, it's interesting, and maybe that's the thing is, like here in Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky Convention Center is now a distribution point, as is the Tri-County Mall, one of our older malls. It's it's a dying mall, let's put it that way, and they're using this as a point for people to go and get their COVID vaccine. Yeah, maybe that there's something else. A hang-up of actually going to a hospital to do this freaks people out, but if I go to a mall, okay, that's maybe a little bit more inviting. Paul Seegert is here. He's a managing partner with PCS Advisers. They advise companies on healthcare practices like we're talking about the reluctance of Americans, maybe you, from getting a COVID vaccine, even if it's available. Still, 49% of U.S. adults, according to the CDC, are willing to be vaccinated. So 1 out of every 2, half of Americans are willing to get the vaccination, knowing what we know about it and the science. we're trying to figure out what the holdup is. One of the back to the doctors and nursing. I think it's interesting you brought this up, and that only 60% of people, or 60% of nursing home staff refused to be vaccinated, so 40% did. But here's the thing: you're around doctors and nurses. Generally, if you are a rank and file, as you mentioned, it could be someone who doesn't have a degree, or you are working in a hospital or clinic setting, and you're not a degreed physician or a nurse. You're at least hanging around. You're around that environment. You talk to these people. You see them on a daily basis. You probably have a personal working relationship with a lot of these professionals. You think that would influence them?
You'd think it would, and clearly it hasn't anywhere near as much as we would think. And it breaks down into lots of subgroups. You get it into the level of education. You can also look at it amongst different ethnicities. And there's greater amounts of hesitancy in some than others, and because of perhaps things in history and just general hesitancy that kind of subset of our culture holds. But we have a lot of work to do, clearly, in that, and we can buy all the vaccines we want. We've got 600 purchased that will be in distribution by July, and we've got 500 million more pre-purchased after that. And when you think about herd immunity numbers, what we actually need, depending upon what percentage of the population you think we need for herd immunity, because obviously we've heard different numbers on that, from 70 to 90%, which would be from 230 million to 300 million. We've got way more. We will have way more vaccine than needed. So I think the fight really is education and distribution. And when you looked at some of the states, I think there is some good stuff going on right now, kind of like what you've mentioned, using these untraditional locations to set up vaccination centers. Just get it in people's arms is my recommendation. Why do we have to have a 30-page document that says this group gets prioritized over that group? Some of the states and jurisdictions had documents literally hundreds of pages long about how they were going to prioritize it. By the time they wrote their 300-page document, we probably could have saved a few lives and got some people vaccinated.
Yeah. So the connection, too, right, is we're thinking herd immunity is somewhere in the 70, 80, 90% range. So let's just play it in the middle, say 80%. We're now at 50% people want to be vaccinated, so that 30% represents what? I'll exclude probably children from that one. So what, maybe 40, 50 million Americans still aren't going to get vaccinated? What happens if we hit 50%? And it doesn't go any higher, that only half the people want to get the vaccine? What happens to herd immunity? What happens with COVID? Have we looked at the numbers in that regard?
Well, I think we have to remember that we're going to get to herd immunity one way or another. The question is, are we going to get there more by infection, or are we going to get there more by vaccination? And I think the timeline toward herd immunity is probably pretty similar. We're going to get there late summer, fall, and ideally we get there more through vaccination than infection, and we save some lives.
Well, we're seeing the infection rate go down, so some people may go, hey, why would I need the vaccine if here in Ohio, the governor yesterday, Paul Seegert, just said, we're open for business. The curfew has been lifted. The bars and restaurants can stay open. You got to wear your mask and distance and all that stuff, but okay, the worst is over apparently. Where's my incentive to get the vaccine then?
Yeah, it does go down. There's no doubt. And just like with the flu vaccine, you see those that are in the higher risk groups tend to be more interested in taking the flu vaccine. I think that's probably what we'll see here. And what we'll do is we'll slow it down quite a bit, but it's going to remain part of what we live with going forward. There will be COVID-19.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing, somebody called in with this too, and I've heard this, is, okay, you're not supposed to get the shot if you've had COVID-19 and you're asymptomatic, right? So I guess... if you, there's people who've had COVID that didn't realize they've had it and may not have had a test or said, I don't know. But somehow you're also supposed to not get the shot. Why is it? Is that because you want to save the shot for people who really need it? Or is there some counter effect that happens if you had COVID and you get the shot? Do you know?
Yeah, I think it's the first of the two. And it's a good point. Lots of us have likely had COVID and have no idea. So to me, it would be pretty sensible to do some of that, maybe some antibody testing or something along those lines to see, not that that's always accurate either, but do some testing to see, have you had it, then get the vaccine. But at this point, and I think you'd probably have people more willing to do that. That it's one thing to get a vaccine, another thing to get some of this antibody tests and so on to see if you've had COVID.
Yeah, different tests,
right?
To that. Different tests.
I think there'd be less resistance to that.
Yeah, just to see if it's in your system or not. I think that would be really interesting, too. So, in a nutshell here, as we get more vaccine out there, as we start lowering the age group for people to get vaccinated, as we get better at this whole thing and have more supply, which has taken a while, do you see collectively of people, hey, a guy I work with got a COVID vaccine. It's almost like voting, right? You got to give him a little sticker, I got my COVID vaccine, and other people see the sticker, and then, hey, if they got a sticker, we're doing a bad job at marketing this, it sounds like, more than anything.
I think so. We're shipping 11 million a week. There's, positioning around if one, administration did a better job of getting it out there than another. I think it's more so it's such a massive rollout that there were going to be hiccups. We're up to 11 million a week, so the 100 million in the first 100 days was kind of already set up and kind of put in place to happen, just on its own momentum that this thing has been gaining. So we're shipping 11 million a week. States are getting about 60% of them in people's arms when they receive them. So we'll get there, and it's there's an end in sight. And I think to your point earlier, the fact that there's these asymptomatic people, probably the numbers of us who've had it is a lot larger than we think. That could be 50 million people right there.
Right. Yeah.
So if you combine that with the people that we know have had it, with the people who get vaccinated, I think there's some optimism. Yeah,
I think probably, and as more people do, it'll be more enticing going, okay, I guess I'll do it because, it seems to be working. Paul Seegert at PCS Advisers, healthcare advisory. Thanks again, Paul. Have a great weekend.